All right. We good to go? There is a couple of things that I added that I wanted to have you guys jot down in the margins or jot down on your own set of notes. And then, do you guys mind if I, is that good? All right, fantastic. A couple of things I would like for you to jot down is the Popol Vuh, Popolvuh, and the Hero Twins. The Popol Vuh is the Mayan cultural narrative. And this cultural narrative talks about the Hero Twins who saved their father by challenging the gods of the underworld to the Pocatawk Mesoamerican ball game. And they defeated the gods of the underworld. Their father came back to life, and they became the gods of maize and corn. They're also associated with the compass north, south, east, west, and their names are Hun and Hunahpu. And they are pretty significant in the Mayan narrative, and they are like top 5 gods in the Mayan faith. Any questions about the cultivation of corn, the importance of corn? We talked about the significance of that corn, the maize crop moving north, east, northwest, and south. All right. Any questions here?
So they defeated something in the underworld to save their father.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they came back, they were.
No, they defeated. The father came back as a god, and they became in the narrative. They're gods of maize. They're gods of corn, but they're also similar to. They're not the only gods connected to the compass. You guys good? It's also one of my favorite narrative stories of the Mesoamerican people. All right. Let's take a look at the 4 dominant societies or dominant cultures of Mesoamerica. So we're just kind of go in order of their strength. So the Olmec would be first. That civilization is going to loosely translate to the rubber people. They extracted rubber. They obviously grew corn and maize, cultivated other crops. They had similar gods and cultural birth stories as the Mayan. In fact, the Mayan are closely connected to the Olmec. The area in which they lived is from Guatemala into Mexico and the Yucatan, same area that the Mayan lived. They predate the Mayan. They used bloodletting sacrifice, warriors, prisoners, those who were defeated in the Pocatawk ball game, the Mesoamerican ball game. And I'm going to show you guys a clip of the Mesoamerican ball game and what a court would have looked like. Just imagine this room. There would be basketball, imagine a sideways basketball hoop up on the side, top of the wall here. top of the wall there. There's a graded slope coming off the wall to the floor. And the idea is this game would be played maybe one player up to 20 players against one another. The game was played with a 5-pound rubber ball. You could only use your hip. The goal was to get the ball through the hoop, but not every game involved the hoop. Sometimes you were just hip checking the ball back and forth. A lot of games were just played for fun, but some games that involved religious or political stakes, those games were sacrificial games. So if you lost, you're going to be sacrificed. Both the Olmec and the Mayan cultures, they'll have gods of death, and those gods of death are going to take those who were sacrificed to the afterlife, and those who are sacrificed in the afterlife are rewarded with honor. So there's much more documentation and much more of a written history of the Mayan gods as opposed to the Olmec. And a lot of that comes down to what I'm going to talk about next, and that's the Mayan land alphabet. So much like the Olmec, the Mayan cultivate corn. They live in the same region, Guatemala to the Yucatan. Their dominance comes after the collapse of the Olmec. Similar temples and pyramids, similar mathematics. In the Western Hemisphere, the Olmec are the earliest credited for the concept of zero. But the Landa alphabet is named for Diego de Landa, and that Landa alphabet is similar to, did you guys remember learning about the Rosetta Stone? So to decipher hieroglyphics, that's essentially what the Landa alphabet does. And we're pretty lucky the Landa alphabet was almost lost. It was in a library in Berlin, and it was nearly destroyed in World War II. They played Pocataq, the Mesoamerican ball game. Human sacrifices to the gods, built extravagant temples, extravagant buildings. Some of these city centers, they might work on a building for 40 to 50 years to make it astronomically correct to the observations in which they wanted these buildings arranged and built. A couple of really cool, notable sites that I would encourage you to visit in your lifetime that are not too difficult to visit would be Chichen Itza and Tulum. They're in the Yucatan Peninsula, so if you ever end up in Cancun or Playa del Carmen in your life, take time to go to Tulum. It's right near Playa, and if you have half a day, go out and visit Chichen Itza. It'll blow your mind. Anybody out there, anybody ever gone? Okay. Okay, cool. All right, so, chances are you should visit Mexico. It's beautiful. Yucatan is incredible. All right, so let's move on to the Aztec. The Aztec are going to live in northern Mexico. Their main city center is Tenochtitlan on Lake Texcoco or Texcoco. You guys are probably pretty familiar with the birth story of the Aztec. North, south, east, west, the prophecy of Quetzalcoatl. Did anybody cover that in Spanish class or world history? Okay, so if we look at the Mexican flag today, their creation story is part of that. The eagle, snake, the cactus. Quetzalcoatl is their creation god that is going to play an important role in the story from before. And I failed, the alarm went off earlier, I failed to ask you who was in the picture that we looked at before. Yeah. You're close. It was Cortez and? You guys are on the right path, but it's not Atahualpa. Montezuma, very good. It is Hernan Cortez and Montezuma. A little bit about Quetzalcoatl. Montezuma II believed that Cortez was Quetzalcoatl returning. All right. Aztecs, similar deal. They had a very sophisticated farming system. Did you guys learn about the Chiampas last year? The floating gardens? The system of canals they had? They had a vast amount of gold, but they weren't using the gold as what? Currency. Very good. Awesome. Okay. Fierce warring tribe. They had enemies all around them. And we talked about exploitation earlier. That manipulation was used by Cortez to take the surrounding enemies and use them as an alliance. The Incan, they are ruling at the same time as the Aztec, but we have to remember that Central America separates them. They are stretched from south of Colombia all the way down to Chile, mostly Peru. They have an intricate system of roads. They have a very detailed system of communication, and that detailed system of communication is known as the Quipu. Quipu kept records, it kept their history. They actually had runners that would transport messages across the empire. You guys did a great job talking about Atahualpa over here. Atahualpa was the last Incan ruler. We'll discuss Atahualpa in more detail when we talk about Pizarro. You can still see the Incan roads that were developed hundreds of years ago from space. There are satellite pictures, you can pull them up on the web. It's unbelievable. The Inca were a bit communistic, a little socialistic. They used the system of mita. And that was a system in which, if you were a part of the empire, you owed work to the empire. So that has to do with the terrace farming, the building of these city centers in places like Machu Picchu, Cusco. The Incan were also fierce warriors as well. Do you guys have any questions here or anything to add? Any prior knowledge you want to share? Yeah.
You said about the game that the money played.
Mhm.
You said that the leaders didn't get sacrificed, but I thought the women got sacrificed.
You're not wrong. There were cases in which winning teams did get sacrificed.
Yeah, so they didn't do it on they want to be sacrificed.
There's record of winning teams being sacrificed in that game, but most of the time losing teams were sacrificed. Yeah. This is on my bucket list for sure. I'd like to make my way to Veracruz, and I want to go to the sites of La Venta and San Lorenzo to check out the colossal Olmec heads. Has anybody ever seen those? Anybody been there? All right. So this is some of the most striking Mesoamerican art. It would go rank right up there with the Easter Island. Yeah, thank you. Easter Island. Anything striking about these heads? Their size is massive.
I've seen like a site, but it didn't have the heads. It was really cool.
Nice.
That you go around and see.
Cool. I gotta get down there. I want to get down and also visit Guatemala as well.
To the one in Paris, because that's from Paris.
Oh, cool. All right, nice. All right. And then on the top left, this is the way a Mayan warrior would have dressed, but that is also the way a Mayan would have dressed for the game of Bocata. On the top right, we've got the Landa alphabet, or the Landa alphabet. On the bottom right, Chichen Itza. And on the bottom left, this is a really famous Mayan god that I wanted to share with you guys. His name is Chak. He is the god, he is the rain god. Similar to the hero twins, he is connected to the compass. He's would be considered a top 3 god of the Mayan. And then the Aztec. This is an Aztec warrior on the top left, dressed as Quetzalcoatl. This is the city of Tenochtitlan, present-day Mexico City. These are the Chinampas floating gardens, system of canals, the temples used for prayer and human sacrifice. And then we have the Inca, Atahualpa. That's not Atahualpa, but looks, this is our Atahualpa reenactor here on the top left. Bottom left is the Quipu for record keeping and history. And on the right there is Machu Picchu. And we're going to take a look, we're going to use both the Aztec conquest and the Incan conquest as a couple of case studies wrapping up this lesson. Any questions for me? Anything to add? All right, we just have a couple of other things we're going to go over in this particular portion of the lesson. We're going to hit on some of the North American civilizations, and we're going to talk a little bit about indirect discoveries. So the first group I want to talk about are the ancestors of the Anasazi and the Hopi, and that is the Pueblo. The Pueblo dominated the Southwest. They were a confederation of tribes. They were a tribe that did have to fight, but they're most remembered for the systems of agriculture and irrigation that they developed. They lived throughout the Southwest, present-day Arizona, New Mexico. They built large religious temples known as kivas. They built large dwellings out of mud and clay known as adobe. And many of them lived in the sides of cliffs as their ancestors, the Anasazi, had. A couple of interesting practices that they did for food preservation. They used underground, in their adobe, underground cellars to preserve agricultural foodstuffs, and they used upper level rooms as smokehouses to preserve meats. And then, of course, their irrigation system allowed them to conserve water for watering crops. They much like the Mayan, the Olmec, the Aztec, the Inca, they were polytheistic, but most of the tribes, they had a number one deity. They had an overarching god, despite the fact that they believed in multiple gods. And now let's make our way down to the southeast. But before I do that, I'd like to answer your question.
Since the Pueblo tribes sometimes live in mountains, do they have salt bones? Or were they able to get salt?
That's a really great question, and I'm sure, and I've never even thought about looking into that. That's awesome. Let's check that out. Good question. Will you please jot that down and remind me of that at the end of the lesson so we can look that up? Did you hear that question? The question was about Pueblo's salt mines. Great question. All right. So let's move down to the southeast. The Creek, the Choctaw, the Cherokee tribes, ancestors of the Appalachian. These tribes lived throughout Appalachia and into Georgia, Alabama, and parts of Mississippi. They were not always together and confederated. The Creek split apart. At times, the Creek and the Choctaw were friendly. At times, they were at war. Ultimately, the Choctaw and the Cherokee will battle the Lower Creek. There's another tribe that I'm not going to talk about quite yet that is not too far geographically from these folks, that also had a bit of a turbulent relationship with them, and that tribe would be the Seminole in northern Florida and southern Georgia. Advanced farming techniques, advanced language, advanced alphabet. The Cherokee were some of the first to develop a system that translated their language and the English language. Tribal hunting, a network of trade routes throughout Appalachia, but that led to cooperative relationships or warfare with other tribes in the region, like the Shawnee, the Susquehanna, Mississippian, and others. Let's move to the northeast, present-day New York, and the Great Lakes region. The three dominant tribes in that area were the Iroquois, the Algonquin, and the Huron. I'm not talking a lot about the Algonquin today because I'm going to, same deal with the Seminole, I'll be talking more about them as we move forward. There's one particular person and one particular tribe that should come to mind when we bring up the Algonquin. Who would that be? Powhatan. Awesome. Powhatan. Good work. So Powhatan is an Algonquin and part of the Algonquin tribe. The Algonquin stretched from the Carolinas all the way up to New York. And they were, I should have brought them up in terms of cooperative relationship with the Cherokee or warfare with the Cherokee, among other tribes. The Iroquois was the strongest military and political confederation of tribes in this era. Other tribes had loose confederations, but this one was brought together. Has anybody ever heard of the legend Hiawatha? It's a literary poem written by Washington Irving. No? Okay. You'll read it, either in here or in American Lit. Hiawatha is real. The legend of Hiawatha brought the Iroquois Confederacy together to defend themselves against the Algonquin and the Huron, most importantly the Huron. So this political and military alliance allowed for a cultural way of life. Like, they lived in the longhouse. They lived surrounded, in many cases, by palisade fences. Imagine on your mother's side, you guys live with your mother's mother and your mother's grandmother. So you live with your grandmother, your great-grandmother, and that whole side of the family, you guys all live together in one long house. That was pretty typical in the Iroquois village. Women wielded a lot of power in the Iroquois community. They determined who chieftains would be. In fact, the mother's lineage was your upward mobility in the society. However, don't be fooled. Their warriors were fierce. Their strategy for torturing their prisoners was ruthless. They skinned their enemies alive in some cases. One thing that we've got here that is pretty famous, or at least we have in this school and in this region that's become more successful and prolific. How many lacrosse players do I have? All right, probably already know. This is how we got the game. These guys are going to train for warfare by playing the game of lacrosse. But the game of lacrosse could run for miles. And there could be scores of people that wound up dead by the end of the game. So it was a training ground for battle. This is also one of the longest running alliances in the Americas. They make it through the French and Indian War, and they're not divided until the American Revolution, which is pretty tragic. We'll cross that bridge a bit later. Our Plains Indians. The tribe we're going to look at as the largest, that kind of absorbs the majority of these tribes, is the Sioux. The Pawnee, the Omaha, the Lakota. As time moves on and the Western Indian Wars, disease in the Western Indian Wars grow more fierce, those tribes will ultimately come under either an alliance with the Sioux, or even some will identify themselves as Sioux. To this day, the Lakota connect themselves to the Sioux, and this is another tribe that manages to hold on until after the American Civil War and into the Western Indian Wars at major events like the Battle of Little Bighorn and the Massacre of Wounded Knee, which we'll talk about later in the Dakotas and in present-day Wyoming. So this group, they were nomadic, they hunted buffalo, they lived in teepees. It's remarkable that Lewis and Clark even made it past these guys in their expedition out west between 1804 and 1806. There was a standoff with the Sioux, but the Sioux let them pass. The mound and wigwam builders, I feel like this group gets left out. This group lived along the Ohio River Valley and the Mississippi River Valley. This is another one of my bucket list spots. Their largest city center was Cahokia. And this is a number of different tribes. Adena, Hopewell, Miami, Shawnee, Mississippian. And they lived throughout these river valleys, like the area of Kentucky. Kentucky is the Shawnee word for Great Meadow. But they expanded beyond the Ohio River Valley into the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. And in some cases, they didn't live in the mountains, they actually lived in wigwams. And the Algonquian were a wigwam dwelling people as well. You all understand what I mean by a wigwam? Okay, a wigwam is basically a hut made out of animal skin, typically deer skin and elk skin. Cahokia, near St. Louis. Has anybody ever been to Cahokia? I really want to check this out. Cahokia, inhabitants of nearly 30,000 people. It was one of the largest civilization city centers in North America. This is what Cahokia looked like then. This is a diagram on the left, and that is what Cahokia looks like today. And I'm probably going to drag my poor family out there at some point. I hope one of the girls will be into history. We'll see. See what happens. I don't know. All right. Who likes going to visit historical locations? All right, cool. Right on. Who dreads it? All right. I appreciate your honesty. All right, cool. Okay, so I would like to wrap up my lesson today talking a little bit about visual evidence of indirect discoverers of the New World. Because I think it is important for us to realize that the Spanish and the English and the French and the Dutch and the Portuguese are not the only people that came to the New World, interacted with native people, and made claims to the land. Or at least made an impact on the people in the land. There have been books that have been written about the archaeology, the carbon dating, the history of potential discoverers that get left out of our history books, or were left out of the history books that I grew up with, but are being incorporated into the history books that you are growing up with. So I want to hit on 4 of these. I'll talk a little bit about another couple that I didn't include on this slide. But I wanted, in the last class, one of our students brought up the fact, they said, man, those Olmec heads, they almost look African. Yeah. Hold on to that. And then we got to this part of the lesson, and there is evidence that ties together that the Olmec people interacted with African explorers. Does anybody know where these African explorers originated from? Okay, South Africa is a really good guess, but that is not where I'm looking for. And there were South African explorers. But I'm looking for a different set of explorers that would have probably interacted with this group. I'm looking for an area of Africa. No, but there were exploration off East
Like
Africa.
a specific name?
A specific area that you all are familiar with. Okay?
South.
Do you guys remember the West African location known as the Gold Coast? Okay? You remember Ghana? You remember Mali? Okay? These areas are where they believed that so Mali, the Malian explorers potentially came to this area and interacted. It's not just the Olmec heads though, okay? It is also in the narrative history of not only the Olmec, but the narrative history of West African peoples. And there's also similarities in the languages, okay? There are also similarities in race as well. And, well, not necessarily race, but instead of saying race, let's say DNA. How might you today find someone in the region of Central America, in that region of Mexico, do a DNA test and maybe find out they have, a connection to West Africa? The problem that historians have, though, is that would that have been a group from Mali, or would that have been a group of slaves that would have come later? So that's where it becomes difficult to nail this down, but I think this is an important indirect discovery that we need to look at. I think this particular history that is being studied today, I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't bring it to your attention. And I'm sure many of you have already heard this before. How many people have heard this? Okay, what's up?
It says with like the people in the Americas that were not in tribes migrated from Africa to South America and what about
Yeah, but when you think about that, those tribes, we're talking about generations, hundreds of years of them moving, you know what I mean? In this group, we're talking like, this is post-Paleolithic era that they would have been connected. These people would have traveled across the Atlantic. And we already know that people on the coast of West Africa, East Africa, South Africa, they were seafaring people. Okay. Sure, of course. All right. Legend of St. Brendan. How many people have ever heard of St. Brendan before? I don't know if I have any Catholics in the group. He is the patron saint of what group of people? Well, he is a Catholic, so he's patron saint of something. Anybody want to take a wild guess? He is Irish. Good, Rachel?
Is it houses or churches or like the houses
It is a group of people.
Oh,
It is a profession.
loners.
Priest. Nope.
Missionaries.
Oh,
Man, you're on the right track. No.
travelers.
Jesuits come later.
Explorers.
You're getting warmer.
So people that explore?
He is the patron saint of sailors and mariners.
Ah,
Yeah. Patron saint of sailors and mariners. And yes, he was a monk. He's an Irish monk. There are legends that say that St. Brendan landed in Newfoundland, traveled across the Atlantic, and came across. So he would have landed quite a few years before the Vikings landed in Newfoundland and in Nova Scotia. All right? St. Brendan's story is a little bit more difficult because his story is wrapped up in historical narratives, Norse tales, and Irish legend. All right? Norstad, definitive visual evidence, just like Jamestown. Okay? How many people have been to Jamestown? Awesome, right? Do you realize that they found all of that in the 90s? 96 is when they figured it out. And like 2002, 2003, that's when the archaeology started. And they've unearthed over 1 million artifacts at Jamestown. Okay? Same deal here. See, Norstad, this particular area in Nova Scotia, in Newfoundland, that is a Viking archaeological settlement. Okay? So why did the Vikings give up? Any ideas? We don't know. We know why they left. I might be getting a little bit ahead of myself here. So why did they come in the first place? Any ideas?
To expand the empire.
Well, yeah, they're expanding the empire, they're conquering stuff, but there's something they want.
Land.
Okay? Land is a great guess. Gold is a great guess. But think food.
Oh, hold on.
Not cool.
Spices. No, they're looking for meat.
What kind of meat?
Meat is
Buffalo.
like
Horses.
deer.
Fish.
What? Oh, wow.
Cod. So the Vikings come over expanding their empire. Who said land out there? Yeah. Who said land? Nice. Land is right. And gold's not wrong because they would have been thrilled to have gold. But what they were really excited about was the cod. Okay?
But they're in the ocean. They were traveling.
Right. But the Vikings weren't just waging war on the open seas, they were also fishing on the open seas. And they had developed ways in which they could preserve fish and preserve cod. And the cod were so plentiful in this region, they wanted to get out and get them. But there were a couple of problems with this particular settlement. Number one, it was pretty cold. Now the Vikings are used to this weather, but it's not only cold, but it's across the Atlantic. The other issue here, guys, is the fact that who are they having to contend with that they're not really able to communicate with? Native Americans. Okay? So there's some interesting stories in the Norse tales where the native people and the Vikings nearly go to war. And they manage to stay out of warfare over some pretty close calls. All right? And then on the bottom right, the Polynesians in Chile and Peru. A couple of indirect artifacts that have come to light. One is a skull believed to be Polynesian. Another is chicken bones that date thousands of years. But beyond the skull and beyond the chicken bones is a particular artifact that historians have, I'm going to use a pun here, I'm not trying to, they've hooked onto. It's a Polynesian fishing hook that would have been used at this particular time, found in Chile. So the Polynesians likely connected with native people in Chile and along the South Pacific coast of South America. Max? Yeah, go for it. All right. A couple of other indirect explorers we'll talk about later. The Chinese, the Japanese. Anybody familiar with the Chinese bell that was found off the coast of the Pacific? Within the last 60, 70 years, an ancient bell was found that was on a Chinese ship. All right, that is where I would like to pump the brakes. Do you guys have any questions for me? All right, I'll be right with you.